Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading from Sword of Darkness by Ellen Preston, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me for Chapter 1. Reece drove down the street packed with clubs, bars, and people hunting for a victim. He turned at the city park. Reece spared a glance away from the car in front of him. He frowned at the dirt road, path lit, with torches on poles that protruded from the ground. He was a little late for the race registration, and there were a few slick cars in front, leading the way in through the high trees on one side and the tall abandoned buildings on the other. The street race was on the edge of a park, with row houses bordering one side. All of the houses were dark, lights out, with broken windows and in need of repair. The block was completely empty, abandoned. The street was clear of parked cars, and the trees on the sidewalk across from the park looked sick with brown leaves. A few trees with blackened trunks and webbed with vines had sprouted up in the middle of the road in odd places. Trash and a foul smell seemed to dim the air around the houses, which had likely been empty for years. The trees and dirt couldn't even cover up the filth. Reece rolled up his window and smoothed his long, thick black hair behind his ear. He flicked the flying pieces of his hair from the back of his studded earring. Reece got out of his car in the worst part of town he'd been in since moving into Newport, Rhode Island. He'd been warned about going into the woods after dark in the area called the Hound Devil Hills. He felt at home. Well, sort of. Not many places were like New York. Tonight, the crowds of teens and some older racers gave him a semblance of belonging he hadn't felt in a long time. It had been some time since he'd been able to race. He was betting none of them could beat him, and his souped-up R32 GTR Nissan Skyline he'd painted black with a luminous lightning bolt on the side. It didn't matter that he'd spent every day since they'd moved there in late spring working on the car. The weapons he'd customized within it, just in case his fellow racers tried to do him dirty, had cost him all his savings. He had to make back the money he'd blown on energy drinks and custom parts to finish the job. The other racers in line at the pop-up table eyed him. One of the tallest guys, who had gray eyes that seemed to glow, spit on the ground and narrowed his gaze. Reece straightened his back, stretching to his full 6 feet 2 inches that matched the guy with the dark hair and pale skin. Reece stepped forward, relaxed his shoulders, figuring maybe he could take down the one guy and maybe a few others if he had to, but that wasn't what he was here for, so he waited. The guy turned his back to him to answer a question from the girl at the table. Reece smirked. There were jerks everywhere. He was used to it since it came with racing, fighting, and his eyes wandered to a tall brunette who winked at him, getting the girl. Focus, Reece, he reminded himself and smiled. His twin sister, Ray, who always teased him about his daydreaming, would pinch Reece to get his attention. He was there for the cash prize. He heard some guys at the car shop mention what this race paid each round, win, lose, or draw. That wasn't usual where he raced before, and he made sure to ask them when and where the next one was so he could go. The guys seemed hesitant until one laughed like he was setting Reece up in some sick joke. They resolved themselves to a joke and shared the race information. He didn't think that a scribbled on his receipt would be a real place or direction to a race, but he decided to go anyway. Reece stood some distance behind the last racer in the line. He smelled weed, liquor, and cheap perfume, all the things he loved about street races. He tugged on his black jean jacket with a pinch and tug, and then stepped up to the table. A girl with orange-red hair, round glasses, and a bubble from her gum sticking out the side of her mouth looked up at him. She popped the bubble and slurped it into her mouth. "You're new here," she smirked, "and have no idea what you walked into, do you?" Her green eyes twinkled. Actually, seemed to have a twinkle of light within them. Reece blinked. "I know why I'm here. I'm here to race." She laughed. "I'm Megan, and my newspaper manages this race. There's no way you were invited. Maybe you need to move on, continue up that street there to safety." She gestured behind him. "No, I'm Reece Lewis, and I don't back down from a race. I was invited. How else would I know where and what time to be here?" Reece Lewis, as in Max Lewis, the prize fighter who opened up one of the largest MMA and trading gyms in town. You're his son? Megan pursed her lips to the side as if thinking about something. She snapped her fingers. Oh, yes, I have a place for you, all right. Wait, I don't want a spot because you heard of my father. Reece shook his head. Megan tisked. She jabbed a hand into her bag and pulled out a rolled up piece of parchment paper. Then why do you want to race? The money and the pink slips. Ah, cash in the loser's car. I guess that's a good reason to risk your life, Megan smiled. Well, then you need to sign a contract and waiver form for damages, Megan pointed. Here, use my pen. She shoved a pen with a feather connected to it toward Reese's hand. You owe me a favor for letting you into our closed race. Yeah, right, you got it. Reece sighed, snatched the pen from the girl, and scribbled his name. Ouch, what the hell? Oh, sorry, here's a tissue. She slid one to him on the table. That pen bites. She giggled. Megan snatched the scroll off the table and put it into her bag. Reece stuck his bleeding finger into his mouth. The prick was small, but it stung. Can I race now? He raised his eyebrows and leaned onto the table. Absolutely, but I can only put you in if someone doesn't place in the last heap. Don't worry, though. Someone always gets hurt. She shrugged and then said, Oh, I need your cell phone number so I can send you a message when you're up. Sure. Reece reached into his pocket for a cell phone. Megan snatched it, typed on it quickly, then held it out for Reece. That's it? He grabbed the phone. Yep, race starts in 10 minutes. Oh, and... Megan leaned closer, covered her mouth, and whispered, None of these people are very friendly. Stay away from everyone till it's time to race. You're fresh meat here. I haven't allowed anyone new into these races in ages. Old family and good money kids from a long line of street racers are the only ones who have ever been allowed into my race. She smiled back at him sweetly as she settled back into her seat and then blew a whistle. Everyone seemed to quiet down. Reece went to his car and leaned on it. What was that? Something wasn't right about that girl, Megan. He held his cell phone tightly in his hand, ready for it to vibrate so he knew when his time had come to race. The brunette that had winked at him earlier glanced at him. She whispered into the ear of the girl next to her, who was dressed like someone out of a steampunk movie. The brunette's blue eyes and pale skin were a contrast to the other girl, who had lighter brown hair, thicker with the tighter curls, and a bun on top of her head. The girl had brown skin. She wore gold-rimmed shades that covered her eyes. The girl held herself in an irritated stance. The glasses had multicolored reflective lenses, and the leather covering just under her eyebrows gave her a flare of mystery. They were dressed in similar colors, like they had coordinated their outfits in blues and bronzes. The brunette's black hair was in long, curled waves around her shoulders and hugged the form-fitting blue mini dress with bronze trim framing the hem. Her friend had on a bronze bustier that pushed up the full cinnamon brown breast and hip-hugging tight blue pants with bronze boots that fit over her knees. After the race, Reece promised himself he'd make sure to seek them out. He'd take either of them home if they let him. He stayed back while the crowd pushed forward to the main street that was once abandoned. He'd watched while they set up the cones, rolled beat-up cars as barriers in place, and girls or guys got on top of each of the obstacles. Some stood seductively, others were positioned with guns like they were preparing for target practice, and some had smoke grenades. At least that's what they looked like to Reece. He smiled. Yes, he would win and was going to have a hell of a time too. The best since moving to this boring town. Chapter 2. The girl he'd been watching sashayed over to him holding a bottle of beer and a soda. Reece smiled. She was mesmerizingly beautiful. Something deep in his soul was called by the sight. She came up to him close within his personal space. Reece inhaled and stood straighter. She smelled intoxicating. Hey, he gave her a small smile. Hey back, she grinned. You're new here. I'm Zemina. You? She handed him the orange soda. Reece. He grasped the soda and took a sip. Thanks for this. You looked thirsty, she giggled. He laughed. You saw me peeping you? Who didn't? She dipped her thickly lashed eyes to caress him with her gaze. She smirked and lifted the beer to her plump lips. You here to race? I'm here to win. Reece chuckled. He wasn't arrogant, but he was determined. This girl made his skin tingle. His mouth actually watered, like he couldn't help himself from stepping closer. I hope you do, but you need to be careful. My friend, he's the 2-time winner and, well, can be brutal competition. Zemina, The steampunk girl stomped over to them and grabbed her by the arm. You know you should not. The girl cast an irritated glance at Reece. Zemina yanked her elbow out of the other girl's grasp. Aura, stop being a party pooper. Reece smiled at Aura, hopeful that she'd lighten up. We're just saying hi. She glared at him, even though he couldn't see her eyes through the reflective glasses, and put a hand on her curved hip. You shouldn't be here. If you were smart, you would leave before you and your car are trashed. Aura turned from him to whisper in Zemina's ear. Zemina sighed. Fine. See you at the finish line, Reece. Zemina winked and jerked away from Aura to saunter toward the guy Reece remembered in line ahead of them. You're way out of your league here, newbie. Stay away from her. She will never be yours. Aura's lips pursed as she smacked her teeth and stomped away. Reece shrugged. Always drama at street races. He wondered how Aura was able to see through her shaded round glasses that covered up her eyes completely, barely leaving her arched eyebrows in sight. She was a bossy friend, but Zemina didn't seem to take it seriously, so Reece wouldn't. He would see her after the race, Aura would just have to deal with it. There was a howl and another sharp whistle. Reece's phone vibrated. He read the message. You're up. We had to cancel. Front line in 3 minutes. Showtime. He did a quick glance at Zemina, who was smiling at him. Reece gave her a wink and hopped onto the hood of his car, sliding to land smoothly on the other side, then got into the driver's seat. He gave the car a rev up and sped to the starting line. Reece felt eyes on him, but he focused straight ahead. One thing he learned from past races was never to seek out the taunt and abuse of other racers. It just killed his precision and concentration. The girl in front of the other cars was Megan. Her red curls hung down around her shoulders. With the backlight of the moon, it resembled flames. Reece blinked because her hair actually appeared like it was curled fire. It was nothing. He was just pumped on adrenaline, and it did something to him. Took him to that place where his irritating ability to feel things that others didn't and see the unseen irritated the grasp of his reality space in his mind. On your mark? Are you ready? She lifted the gun and fired. Reece hit the accelerator and cut off the orange Mazda MX-5 Miata. He felt the angry bump of the shortened cars push him forward. Someone in one of the cars tossed a ball of fire in the air. Reece pulled the throttle and his car surged forward. An explosion lit the side of his car and he pushed his elbow on the armrest to roll up his window, barely in time. Flames of ash rained on the side of his vehicle. From a tree, some girl with the face of a clown and pink hair poured acid on the passenger side of the car ahead of his. Damn, the race I can win, but making it out of here alive is another story. Reece jerked the car to the left. He was only a few behind the leader in the red Chevrolet Camaro. A guy jumped in front of his car. Before Reece could hit the brakes, the boy smiled and threw an axe straight at him. Reece sped up. The guy's eyes widened in fear. Then Reece shifted gears, barely missing the running boy and the axe by several inches. A green Nissan 350Z kept pace with him. You're gonna die tonight, meat boy, the driver taunted. Reece glanced to the side in time to see a boy with glowing eyes and dipped brown bushy eyebrows point a flare gun at him. Just as the weapon fired, Reece pushed the button on the dashboard to arm the windows with an electric charge. Sparks flew off his window as the fire bounced from his car to his assailant. The car swerved, was hit by an acid bomb, and caught fire. The rider jumped out of the car in the nick of time. Reece smiled, glad he installed bullet and fireproof glass with an extra added defense. Didn't pay to be cheap. He took deep, calming breaths, no music, no distractions. He was going to win. The red Chevrolet Camaro was only 2 cars in front of him. Reece had to time the nitro release right. His was different than anyone else's since he tampered with it, adding other chemicals not only to push his car forward, but to burn out the view of any other cars behind him. The smoke it released helped him to get a gain on the competition. Reece sped up between the 2 racers tailing the lead and tried to get a pass-through. One, a silver Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 9, and the other, a white Ford Mustang, were not giving an inch. There was a brief opening, but as it began to close, Reece took it. The fit was tight, and the Mustang rammed into the side of his car. He heard a grinding sound. A drill from the other car cut through Reece's passenger door. He smiled at what he planned for the other opponent. Reece pressed the button on his wheel that held metal sharp and flat tools. The squeal of the lever pushed them out within reach of the car next to him. His car groaned, and Reece smashed into the car on his right. The Mustang was dislodged as it was rammed with the flat side of the bar from Reece's car. Adrenaline pumped in his veins. Only 2 cars blocked his path to the finish line. He released the nitro valve on his dashboard. The car heated up with intense smoke. Fire blasted from the rear of his car. Reece was catapulted through the air to land with a bump at the tail bumper of the leading race car. The finish line was close. Reece was going to make it. He veered to the right to get an opening on the car ahead. The racer slowed up a bit to slam into Reece's car. The car skidded into an abandoned truck. Reece struck the wheel in time to lessen the impact and regain momentum. He countered the opponent's every move. He couldn't get a breakthrough. Instead, he ramped onto the car, hoping to piss off the driver and make him careless. The driver recovered and released nitro to take him over the finish line. Reece came in second. He tightened his hand on the steering wheel and stopped the car. "Get out of the car." The other racer with gray eyes banged on Reece's door. He went to open it at the same time the guy yanked it right off the hinges. Reece frowned. The bastard was strong. "What the hell is your deal?" Reece hopped from the car. "You think you can take me, newbie?" The guy pounded Reece's chest. Megan jumped between them. "Breck, back off. You won the first round." Another guy ran up to them and charged Reece. He pivoted out of the way, barely avoiding a tackle on the ground. The guy hopped up with the fluidity of a beast. Reece crouched and moved side to side to the music in his head as he played to prepare for fighting.